think. Yep.
Here and we'll apply this factor and supposedly it levels out.
Chris, you want to?
You'll start the meeting, you're the vice chair, Sonny's not here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Certainly. Good morning, everyone. This is the Wednesday, June 2nd, Public Health and Safety Committee meeting. I'll call the meeting to order, and may we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have a roll call, please? Commissioner Thomas?
Yep.
Stepka?
Here.
Richardson?
Here.
Max Bauer? Here. Inman?
Here.
Hooper?
Here.
Friend? Here. Lease?
Present.
Wheelock is absent. This is our first opportunity at our Public Health and Safety Committee meeting for public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment, please come forward and state your name.
Ralph Sofferty, Traverse City, 220 Huron Street. I'm here, as you probably recognize, seeing this on your agenda, on the Police School Liaison Program. I'm probably the only one that has been a police school liaison officer, been a detective, been a captain, been a chief, and have worked in 4 different areas, cities and counties, in dealing with the police school liaison program. It's something that started actually in 1937 in Atlanta, Georgia. So when they first started it, and then of course it came to Flint. And in 1957, they started police school liaison officers there, and that's when I first came in contact with them. And as an administrator, I have worked 27 years as a police administrator, as a chief and a captain before that, and recognized that police school liaison program is intricate in any law enforcement agency. And of course, when I came to Traverse City, they had one already started. The county was the leader and started the first one at that time, which was West Junior High. And then came here, and we decided, after listening to one of your members up there, who at the time was a sergeant but then became patrol commander, we felt that it was necessary for us to have a police school liaison officer at Central High School. And the reason being that our car was there most of the time anyway. Admittedly, there were more students at that time because there was only one high school. However, it was our feeling that we wanted to perpetuate 4 objectives, 4 goals. And of course, that was education, prevention, investigation, and rehabilitation. And all 4 of those are involved as a police school liaison officer, as with what their job is. And we talk about the 200 to 300 complaints that they have in the county and at our schools, at each one of those individual schools. That's one thing, but you don't hear about the prevention that was put into place, or the education that was put into place by those officers who were working in those schools and working with the staff. I can think of just 2 programs that we got involved in. One is, of course, is a truancy program where the school at one time used to have over 200 cases in probate court. I don't believe it's that high anymore. I think that they've had a substantial impact on that, and that's due to the officers, police school liaison officers, and other officers working in the field to work in those cases, along with the Department of Human Services. You should have received a letter, at least I saw a copy of a letter that came to the city that explained that the interactions that were so important at the schools, having the people there, having an officer there, having the information that officer has after working with those young people. Along with that is the trust that's built up with young people with that liaison officer while he's in that school. He's a part of the staff, he's a part of the teaching staff, part of the custodial staff, part of all the staff, because he attends all those individual events. I also recognize that the county is having a difficult time. I can read the paper and find that your budget is, like most governmental budgets right now, is very difficult. But I guess you asked the question, $117,000 is being requested according to what I was able to read here. Is that much when we start talking about the future of our community, which happens to be the people who are attending our schools? The young people that are going to be the future leaders, and having an officer in that school, I think, aids and helps give them a better education. And so I certainly support that, and have supported it, even though I'm a civilian now, and would work hard for that. I believe that it's something that we need in our community. It's something that is a part of the community, an important part, and we don't recognize it because you don't see it day to day. We don't see it, oftentimes you don't think about a police officer until you're in trouble, and you say, what's the big thing? Where are they? Well, in our schools, in this day and age, it's a lot different than when we went to school, at least most of us went to school. We didn't have to worry about that. But now you do have to worry about that because of the number of assaults that are occurring and the number of other crimes that you saw a copy of that are occurring in our schools. That never happened before. We didn't have to worry about that. You might have a few little fistfights, but nothing like you're having now. And I believe that just the idea of having that cooperation from that officer to be able to work with the community to deal with some of those tough acts. Now, we've been very fortunate that we've not had a major act in one of our schools, but that doesn't mean that it can't happen. And that gives, in having an officer working with it, I can tell you, somebody that's there working with the system, all right, that knows the system, makes it a lot easier for us that are coming into the school as law enforcement officers. I say us as a retired guy, too. Coming into that school makes it a lot better because you know how it operates, and you know how to take care of emergency situations. We have an ERT team that trains to go into schools, elementary schools. Did you ever think about that? I never did when I came into this field, and I suspect that Larry never thought about it when he came into the field 40 years ago either. That you never thought about that happening. But times have changed. And I hope that you don't abdicate your responsibility like the school has. And that's exactly what they've done. They've abdicated their responsibility towards this particular issue. They must not think it's that important. I think it's important. I'm a parent and a grandparent. I've got grandkids that are going to be going to those schools, and I want to make sure they have a liaison officer, that's there to be able to assist them in their growing process. That's all. Thank you.
Any additional public comment? Sheriff?
Good morning.
Good morning.
With me this morning is Deputy Greg Stroh. Greg began his association with the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office as a reserve officer. He then served as a Marine deputy in the summer of 1999 and in December of 1999 as a seasonal snowmobile officer. On February 28, 2000, he was hired as a full-time permanent road patrol deputy. During his full-time employment, Greg served as the Peninsula Township Community Police Officer at one time, and at one time as the Kingsley Area Schools Police Liaison Officer. In October of 2006, after being accepted into the United States Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, Greg took a leave of absence. He reported to Quantico, Virginia, where he went through Officer Candidate School, the Basic School, and Signal Intelligence Officer course. Following his training, he was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Greg did 2 back-to-back tours to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He began his career as a second lieutenant and upon honorable discharge was ranked as a first lieutenant captain select. During his time away from the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office, in addition to his military service, Greg married Jera, and recently they had a newborn son, Jackson. Greg has returned to a position with the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office as a road patrol deputy effective May 20th, 2010, and we are happy to welcome him back and thank him for his service to our country.
Welcome.
So,
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to approval of the agenda. If there are no changes to this morning's agenda, I would entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
I would make that motion.
Support.
Discussion? All those in favor?
I just want to point out, Fred is, under his section, is going to give you an update in addition to the NACO prescription drug program about the immunization station at the mall, and I just want you to be aware that he'll give you an update on that. That's not an action item.
All right. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. Next on our agenda is the consent calendar.
The purpose of the consent calendar is to expedite business by grouping non-controversial items together to be dealt with by one commission motion without discussion. Any member of the commission, staff, or the public may ask that any item on the consent calendar be removed therefrom and placed elsewhere on the agenda for full discussion. Such requests will be automatically respected. If any item is not removed from the consent calendar, the action noted, receive and file, or approval is approved by a single committee action adopting the consent calendar. A, receive and file, Veterans Services Activity Report. 2, Veterans Services Draft Minutes of May 20, 2010. Donation Acceptance, TC Church of Christ. Donated Pharmaceuticals Postal Department. And Commission on Aging Report. B, approval, Public Health and Safety Committee minutes of 5/5/2010. Property to be declared surplus, GTSO. Renewal of early on-service agreement, contract available for review and administration. The 2009 annual report, separate packet enclosed. Amendment number 3 to comprehensive planning, budgeting, and contracting agreement. And renewal of Mitchell and McCormick server support agreement, contract available for review and administration.
Is there any member of the public that would like an item removed from the consent calendar? Seeing none, is there any member of the board that would like an item removed from the consent calendar? I do have a question for Dennis. I'm sorry, Dennis.
Sorry.
Number 6 on approval, renewal of Mitchell and McCormick server support agreement. Did we bid that out?
The contract, as it states, was available in the office for anybody who wanted to review it.
I was gone.
Oh. Yeah.
I was just wondering, did we bid it out?
Oh, no, this is a renewal of the contract.
Okay.
This is a professional service contract, so it's one that we can renew. It's our existing software maintenance contract.
I would entertain a motion for approval of the consent calendar.
So moved.
Support.
Discussion. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries.
No, we have a roll call on the consent calendar.
Thank you. Roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Stepka.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Inman.
Yes.
Hooper.
Yes.
Friend.
Yes.
Lees.
Yes.
Thomas.
Yep.
Max Bauer.
Yes. Next on the agenda, Grand Traverse Sheriff Office.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Bob Hall. I'm a captain with the Sheriff's Office, and I serve as the jail administrator. In the Grand Traverse County Jail, we have an inmate telephone system. That system allows inmates to be able to call from their housing units to their family and friends, attorneys, counselors, whomever. The system has been in our jail for the past 15 years approximately, the last 12 with the same vendor, Securus Technologies. The system offers a lot of tools for the Sheriff's Department, investigative tools. It's recorded so we can go back and listen to the calls, and it offers the investigative officers of the Sheriff's Office a lot of special tools to be able to investigate their crimes. The contract that we currently have with Securus expires August 14th. We sent RFPs out to the 9 vendors that are either in the area or well-known throughout the United States. Of the 9, we also advertised in the local paper. Out of the 9, we received 3 proposals from Securus Technology, Michigan Paytel, and TIP Systems, LLC. We formed an evaluation team. The evaluation team looked at each of the evaluations and broke it down. We analyzed our current call usage, and approximately 80% of the phone calls that the inmates make are local within the Grand Traverse area. We contacted at least 2 references from each of the vendors that were provided. And when we got all done, it became pretty clear to us that Securus Technologies was in the best interest of not only the inmate, but also Grand Traverse County. And we would ask that the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners award a 3-year contract, a continuing contract that we've already had with Securus for the next 3 years.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Friend.
I would just like to say, Captain Hall, that you and your staff did a great job analyzing the proposals and giving us the information to show how thoroughly that you did analyze those. So I would authorize the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Office to award the inmate telephone service contract to Securus Technologies for a period of 3 years, beginning August 15th, 2010, and ending in August 15th, 2013.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. Opposed, same. Motion carries.
Madam Chairman, I just want to point out that Dean and I met with Bob about 3 weeks ago to talk about the new medical care contract at the jail. You know, we're only in about our 3rd month of that contract, but Bob is, analyzing it and preparing statistics, and we expect in about 3 months we'll come back to you and give you a 6-month report on how that's working out. So I just wanted to give you an update that we're monitoring that.
Wonderful.
Very good, thank you.
Next on the agenda, school liaison officers.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Nate Elger from the Sheriff's Office. Dave Meacham from the Sheriff's Department. On April 19th, we met with this board and the TCAPS board, the Kingsley board, to talk about the school liaison officer program, specifically the funding thereof. And I thought that was a good meeting. It was an educational meeting. It was a privilege to present it. However, that meeting did not produce any results that we were hoping for. The school boards have not found it in their ability to pay for the funding for their portion of the officers in the program. So that leaves us in a position where we have to come back to this board and ask for the funding. We have had these officers since 1980, and we have been, in essence, working with the county and the schools for the last 5 or 6 years through this arrangement with the school liaison officers. And if we did not think this was a valuable program, we would not be sitting here today. We have other things that we could be doing, and we believe that this program is a very valuable program and it needs to exist. We have 65 sworn officers. 65 sworn officers can handle the complaints in the school. It's not just about handling the complaints. We talked at length on April 19th about the relationships that we have made and maintained in these schools with the students and the staff and the parents. Those students, staff, and parents have a relationship with the police officers that they come into contact with every day. If this funding is not there, we will not be able to have the school liaison officer program. And we are prepared to make adjustments to our staffing accordingly. The sheriff is a firm believer if you're going to do something, you're going to do it correctly and you're going to do it right. And we cannot do the school liaison officer program correctly with 2 less officers, which in essence would, the reduction of the funding will represent the reduction of 2 officers. So we are asking the Board of Commissioners to consider funding the school liaison officer program for the remainder of this year. And we will be approaching the Board of Commissioners through budgetary discussions to increase the budget of 2011 for the additional 2 officers.
Are there any questions? Commissioner Thomas?
I wonder how long, if we just ended this program in September, I wonder how long it would be before the school boards would be here hollering uncle. You know, because after these years, they're not going to get along without these officers. They might think so, but...
Mr. Thomas, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that they receive an invaluable service.
I know they do.
And I think they're aware of that. I just don't know that it's something they can deal with right now. But it won't be long.
Commissioner?
Oh, I don't think it would.
I'm sorry.
Nate, at the last discussion, the previous meeting, we lightly touched on some other options that we were talking about in order to shear down the expense, both for the end of the year and for next year. And one of them was possibly looking at not having the officer attend, evening basketball, football, those kinds of events to help, and the question of the necessity of having an officer at those games versus the role of the liaison officer during school hours. I'm just wondering, have you had an opportunity to take a look at that to see what kind of savings would be involved if we didn't have the officer attend, the night functions?
We have not analyzed the overtime figures for the attendance in the after-hours events, but it would be the overtime exclusively.
It would be overtime?
Yes.
Okay.
The school pays for $1,000 or $750 of overtime, and anything above that the county pays for, but all of those functions are overtime. So the wages and fringes of the detective are already paid for in this arrangement.
So the $28,987, that does not include any overtime?
That
is correct?
includes $750 in overtime.
Total?
So if I could follow up, is it
Go
okay?
ahead.
If we said, here's the officers, but no overtime, that would reduce the amount of overtime that's expended for those officers for the fall semester out of our regular overtime budget, because you told us other than $750, we pay it all.
That is correct.
And so the question is, about how much does that equate to that could be put towards that $28,000?
And that's kind of where I was leading, yeah.
That I don't know.
You don't know?
The majority of the overtime comes from the football games, the basketball games, and the hockey games. All of those sporting events are done at this point in time, but would be there in the fall.
And how valuable are those overtime events, the attendance at those overtime events in terms of developing the relationship with the students?
I'm going to say that football, we need to be there just because of the sheer number of, at Thurlby Field, we have 5,000 to 7,000 people there, whatever their gate receipts are there, so there's a lot of kids there. Hockey, not as much. It used to be. It used to be, I think, more well-attended. 7, 8 years ago, the attendance has gone down, as it has gone down in basketball and other areas. So I think we need to be there at football. We need to be there at dances. We need to be there at proms, that type of thing, because that is where, kids will try to sneak the alcohol in or drink out in the parking lot and try to get in. But there are a few events that we've been looking at this last couple of years that we're reevaluating and probably not going to be attending this next year, really, no matter what happens.
Thank you.
Any additional comments?
I have a question.
Commissioner Friend?
Do you have a sense of, you mentioned the alcohol at proms, dances, those sorts of things. Do you have any sense of how the Board of Education intends on dealing with those problems in absence of the liaison position?
The way that the relationship is set up, I mean, most of our, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of our contacts are made by the volunteers or made by the principals and the staff at those dances. And I've been working with Joe Tibaldi for a lot of years, and he has that zero tolerance policy, and he adheres to that. And so all of the staff that work with him take care of that. So he is out there all the time, going out in the parking lot. They are checking kids as they're coming in, that type of thing. And then the liaison is also working along with him to solve that situation. So if we're not there, they're still going to continue to do that. And then they're just going to contact Central Dispatch if we're not there and would ask for a patrol car to come up to handle that situation.
I just wanted to let other commissioners know, it was a couple weeks ago, I stopped over to one of the liaison officers just to see how things were going, and I became aware of a stack of letters from students and a joint letter from several teachers that were directed to the Board of Education. I did find out that the Board of Education hadn't received those letters, so I went and made copies. I couldn't go to the Board of Education meeting. I called Chris. She was able to go and give those letters to the Board of Education. In the time frame that I knew this was going to be on the agenda, I didn't have time to make copies for our commission. It was directed to the Board of Education, but if anybody would like a copy of those, I can sure arrange to get them. But basically, again, it was just a compilation of letters from 6th graders, individual letters from 6th graders, and then one joint letter from several teachers that basically how much they valued the liaison position and the relationship that they had with them. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, and again, if you wanted a copy, I could get that for you.
Commissioner Flees?
Well, I agree with the comments Ralph made basically this morning, and of course, I'm in favor of the program, but I'm not in favor of funding the program 100%. And I'm not going to vote to continue the funding in any amount, $28,000 or $115,000. The school board Well, I think the school administration has really been pompous towards this liaison program. It just infuriates me with their attitude. And what Commissioner Friend said about those letters, I find it really amazing that administrators would have in their possession letters addressed to the Board of Education and not deliver them. It takes a county commissioner to go make the copies and make sure the board gets it. I think Commissioner Thomas maybe is right. I think we need to not fund it, and I'm sure they'll decide. Their budget's much larger than ours. The percentage, 86,000 for TIPS, for example, is minute. They've not made any other cuts that I've noticed. I asked that direct question that day. Have there been any cuts in sporting programs or any other programs? Didn't really get an answer, but I know the answer. The answer is no. They're just continuing. File publicly in the newspaper or in the media said, well, the ball's in the County Board of Commissioners' lap now. Well, we're not going to play that game, and I would hope my fellow commissioners don't play that game. I hate to see the program cease to exist, but I think the schools will find out they'll have much less time for educating. They'll be paying police officer, and perhaps they'll reconsider their vote.
Commissioner Richardson.
Looking at the numbers of complaints and so forth that that you've listed, Nate, here over the last few years, do you have any idea of like how many of these complaints would have been filed if the school liaison officer was not on duty? I mean, that is, how many of these complaints would reach the level of calling a deputy into the school?
Yeah, I'm guessing the bulk of them. The self-initiated activity on the part of a school liaison officer is going to be limited to observance of tobacco or an MIP of tobacco, something like that along those lines. Normally, these are, I have a problem complaints. Somebody calls the office, the principal, the school, or the school liaison officer directly. The self-initiated activity is pretty limited with the school liaison officer. So the bulk of these would be, we're going to respond to these anyway.
Okay. And do you know how many of these complaints involved bringing in someone else from the sheriff's office as well as the on-site liaison officer?
That I do not know. Not right now.
Commissioner Thomas, then Commissioner Inman.
I agree with Larry about the funding, but unfortunately, I think whether we fund it or not, it's going to cost us the same. I don't think we're going to save a dime by not funding it because they're going to have to be there anyway. And I just don't see where, I'd like to be able to take the school board and let them try to run the schools for a day or so, but I hate to support the program for them, but on the other hand, I think it's such a good program that, and I just don't see us saving any money by cutting it out. I probably will vote for it, just because I can't see any other answer.
Commissioner Inman.
I agree with Commissioner Thomas. I think these are one of the items that, unless we tackle them at an earlier age, we're just going to have compounded problems later on. So unless we correct their behavior during their school years, we're going to have compounded problems when they get out of school. I see this partly preventative, but you're going to see continued problems if you don't deal with them in the school system. So at least at this point, through the end of the year, I would make a motion that we approve the $28,987, and we would ask the Sheriff's Department to do the overtime analysis for us, not only for the rest of the year, but projected for next year. I would, not sure where we would take the money out of. I don't know if we got anything left in contingency, assuming that we've got a hole in our budget that we've got to tackle and discuss at Ways and Means for, during the month of June. So I think for now, I'll get it on the table as something we would fund.
I will support that.
Discussion. Commissioner Friend.
One of the things, when you went to that school board meeting, there was discussion, wasn't there a motion to have administrators of both the organizations get together to talk to try to see if there was any other cost sharing or funding ideas and so forth, and was that not voted down?
It was. That's exactly what happened.
And that was not a motion to take up the fund, to
No,
continue it, it was just
no.
simply to keep the conversation going?
Yes, and to explore, any other funding sources, but no, it was voted down. Dennis?
Well, just to talk about the finances for a moment, and I'm now speaking from that role only. I think we have, and this is a rough number, but I think we have about $35,000 left in your contingency for this whole year. So this would take pretty much the whole contingency. But as kind of your finance person, my bigger concern, and this is not a reflection on the program, my bigger concern is how you're going to fill that hole next year as opposed to this year. And, it makes sense to me to do this. I can see that everybody feels strongly this is a good program, as do I. But we're going to come to you in 2 weeks, and we're going to give you a plan to save the $750,000 that we have to cut out of this year's budget in order to balance this year's budget. Dean and I are going to talk to you also, and we're going to make the assumption that for 2011, based on your comments in last year's budget, that you want us to present you a budget that shows no use of fund balance or minimal use of fund balance and no use of, and to reflect the reductions in the revenues that we're seeing, such as tax revenue. So we estimate we're going to have to cut between $2 to $2.5 million out of this year's budget in order to balance next year's budget under those parameters. So I just bring that to your attention because not to say you should not fund this, but to say that it's going to only magnify your difficult job in coming up with priorities for next year. And I just wanted you to be aware of that. I mean, in all likelihood this year, what we're going to do for budget next year is we're going to target revenue projections, and we're going to give departments revenue projections that we're going to ask them to provide us a budget that meets those revenue projections, each individual budget. That's going to mean that in almost every case, departments will get less money next year than what they had this year. So in this case, for example, when you approve this, you're going to have to be aware that the sheriff is already probably going to be faced with cuts in his department, and then he's going to have to add another $115,000 that he's going to have to find, if that's the way you do it, plus the cost of any increase in cost of operational cost, manpower, those kinds of things. So it's quite a task, and that's not to say you shouldn't do this, because I can see it's one of your priorities, but what I'm saying is you're facing quite a burden in terms of balancing this budget next year, and if you decide that you want to do this, be aware that it makes the problem even more difficult when the time comes.
Commissioner Friend?
I just had a question for Dennis. This motion, the way the timing would work, then this would fund it through the end of the year, but the fiscal year is obviously different than the school year. So we would be looking at having liaison officers in the schools through the middle of the next school year, and then if there was not funding, they would be removed in January, correct?
Yeah, I really don't think you should look at this as a stopgap or an opportunity to work with the schools to try to come up with a program to refund the program, because they will be, I think, in the middle of their school year, and it's highly unlikely. The only reason to do this is that you believe that it's a worthwhile and necessary program, and you intend to fund it yourself come this budget. I think that's the way you have to look at that. I think it would be a mistake to expect or hope that the school will change their mind and start funding it coming in January, because they'll be in the middle of their school year, and that's not likely.
That's my concern. I don't see the willingness on the school board to try to work on this issue based on that vote. And also, I'm concerned about having a liaison officer in there for half of the school year and then removing them.
Well, I want you to know, Nate, that in what Dennis said, it is a worthwhile and necessary program. Unfortunately, the school board does not believe that it is. I don't believe that the county board, faced with the budgetary constraints that we have, can continue to pick up partnerships that we have established. And I think partnerships in this community are extremely important. I'm sorry to see the school board choose to discontinue the partnership, but in my view, that's what they have done. I will not be supporting the motion, and I'm truly sorry to say that, but that's why. Commissioner Richardson?
You had said that you didn't think you could do this program with 2 deputies. You don't think that having a deputy in each school for half a day would be that worthwhile?
You're not going to have an officer in each school for a half a day. They're going to be a call taker. They're going to be a plainclothes, plain car, drive from building to building, handling calls. That's what they're going to be doing. They're not going to be doing any liaison work. There's not going to be any relationship building. You can't do that with 2 people. Not with that many calls. They're going to be handling half of the sexual assault and child abuse that come in. We get about 100 to 115 disclosures. Most of them come in the schools. Those are our long-term investigations. They are, once you get tied up on that, you can, a short case is 8 to 16 hours. A long one can be 40 to, any number of hours. So once you take one of those, you're done for 1 to 2 days.
Okay, but these are calls that the school liaison officers take now?
Yes.
On site?
They handle half of them. Because they're disclosing in the schools, and they know the kids. I'll call out, Department of Human Services, Children's Protective Services will send me a referral for the, West Middle School, and I will call up to Detective McKinley and assign that disclosure, that sexual assault or child abuse allegation to him, and he'll, I know exactly who it is. I know that person, that kid. That's why we have them do that.
But, wouldn't it work that this detective could be in one school in the morning and a different school in the afternoon, and then if he gets called away on one of these issues?
Which schools are we going to service? That's what I'm saying, is that we're getting backed into the corner that, are we going to just service West Senior High and the 2 middle schools? We're covering the county with 4.
Well, you're covering 4 schools, right?
No, we're covering the county. We're covering the county. We still respond to Grand Traverse Academy. We still respond to Traverse City High School. We respond to Traverse City Christian School.
Okay, but those responses aren't done by the school liaison officers, are they?
They are.
Oh, they are. Oh, okay. So you actually are pulling school liaison officers out now to. Okay, so
they're far and few between at those schools, but we do service those schools.
Okay, so that liaison officer is not at that school then all day long, every single day.
Correct.
Okay.
Most of the time they are.
That's what I didn't understand. And honestly, I don't mean to compound your problems here, but since it seems apparent that the city is going to, cancel their school liaison program in Traverse City Central, if you continue this program, I think you should strongly, I would strongly recommend you look at extending it to the 5th Public High School.
Commissioner Stepp?
That's
more of an issue for, next budget year, but...
Before, Mr. Richardson, I did contact, as I promised, I contacted the Department of Justice and spoke with their representative for forfeiture expenditures. And we spoke on the phone about it, and she, at that point, Molly Prugi, I spoke to her, she said it did not sound like we could use that funding for that specific purpose, but she asked me to reduce it to writing, submit it to the Department of Justice, and they're going to have their legal guru look at it and see if we could somehow use that forfeiture funding for that. So that has been done. I have not heard a written response back from them.
Commissioner Stepka, then Commissioner Thomas.
I wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Maxbauer's statements with regard to fiscal responsibility. I think we need to be very conscious and conservative with what we fund. I think we're probably still in for a couple of tough years financially, but Dennis spoke about priorities too in the budget. And I remember back on the 19th of April when we had this meeting, it was mentioned how important the safety of the school environment is to the education of the kids. And you cannot provide the education without a safe environment within which to operate. I've talked many times to the liaison officer at West High School, and I know what happens there. There's been some very serious incidents, I believe, in just the last several weeks. And I think we need to make it a priority that our students, we owe it to our students and their parents to have a safe educational environment. And I think you really reduce the safety of that environment by taking away the liaison officers. And I think this is something that we're just going to have to make a priority somehow.
Commissioner Thomas?
I agree with Mike. Did I hear you say that the city's going to quit participating?
Yes.
Well, I mean, they haven't made a decision yet, but they're dealing with their budget, which starts on July 1st, so they're dealing with it right now, and based on the sentiment I've heard expressed in meetings, it seems unlikely that they'll continue to fund that.
Ralph was just in here pitching for us to keep funding it, and then
Well,
I want to.
he has
He's-
strongly supported it at the city level as
So
well.
do I.
But other commissioners have not.
But, I mean, the issue with the city is that, their liaison officer has been off on medical leave for a number of months now, and so they actually haven't had one at Central.
Commissioner Fleece? And then I'd like to have a vote, unless anyone
Whatever,
strongly
sure.
objects.
I don't see the need for the haste of this vote this morning. I don't think we have to make a decision until August, even early September. School's going to be out another week. And I think after listening to Dennis, if we're going to have to make $2.5 million cut, and we're not going to want to take from somebody or somewhere, we're not going to want to get into the fund balance, we're really going to have to select some important priorities. And I think we need a better look at the picture in its totality. And I would like to see the commissioners postpone this vote, or if we're going to vote on it, then I'd like to see a no vote, so it buys us more time to look into this. I don't think we need the haste that we're proceeding at this morning.
Make a motion to table.
You want to make a motion to table?
I just have a quick question. if
Yes.
you can, for Dennis, this motion, the commission isn't pulling their funding for the liaison position. We still have that in place and are supportive of that. It's just the gap of the school's fund contribution, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry. Yes?
Well, wait. Let me make a
Let Nate speak first.
Go ahead, Nate.
The motion to table this is problematic for us. It's minimal, but it is problematic. I am fairly certain we could go into the sheriff's department budget right now. We've been short-staffed. We anticipate being short-staffed for a while, and identify funding that could help this process out of our 702 line items. What Dennis said is correct. It's not about this year, it's about next year. What are we going to do 2011 and forward for the sheriff's office? Right now, we have 4 people whose lives are in the balance. They don't know what they're doing in June, July, or August. It causes us problems. Those aren't global scale problems, but they are problems we have to deal with on a daily basis. They don't know where they're going to be working, what hours they're going to be working, and I think it's fair to them and their families that we have some resolution to this as soon as we can. The school year starts September 1st. We could drag this right to September 1st. I think with the sheriff's funding alone, and the savings in 702 will be able to cover the $28,000, but that is not what we're talking about here today. We are going to come back to you through the budget process and ask you for funding in 2011 and forward. That is the decision we are asking the commission to kind of guide us on.
Commissioner Richardson and Sheriff Bensley, you stood if you'd like to say something. Okay.
Nate, you said there's 4 individuals who don't know what they're going to be doing this summer. I mean, that's not true, because they always go on other duty in the summertime, don't
No,
they?
that's not accurate. Depending on what their investigations are, have been, what the needs of the Detective Bureau, those officers have traditionally stayed in the Detective Bureau and worked through the school year or through the summer, completing investigations, handling on-call responsibilities, and investigations that come into the Detective Bureau. They also have, in the past, depending on the need of the road patrol, gone back to the road patrol and service road patrol functions.
And you're short in road patrol right now because of some of the
They are
incidents.
short in the road patrol. They are short because of other staffing reasons.
Right.
But assuming this funding goes away, we are assuming that in September, we're going to cut 2 of our people. And these are all assumptions, but
Well, that's a good assumption. That's what you're going to have to do if that's the case.
And I mean, I appreciate your concern, but we've even tried to get out in front of the budget a little quicker this
Yeah.
year than in years past, as far as my understanding is, and I haven't been around here that long. But I don't think it's fair to ask us to make a commitment for all of next year. I mean, really, the commitment is, this is how much money we can allocate to the sheriff's office. I mean, you guys are the ones who are going to decide how you're going to spend it. You're going to decide whether you need it more on road patrol or need it on school liaison or whatever.
and we've made our decisions. Based on current funding, this is how we want our sheriff's office to look. Absent this funding, we know what the sheriff's office is going to look like. We're in a bubble period, so to speak. We don't know where the commission is going to go with this program. We can find the money for 2010, the majority of it, but where are we going in 2011? We don't see the need to start a school liaison program in September if we're going to cut it in January.
See, if I can?
Dennis?
And the issue, and it'll depend on how the board approaches the budget next year, and I know you know this, but this county has, in the past anyway, had a process whereby they look to their department heads and their experts in the area to make a determination on allocation of funds and what programs are most important. You've made it clear that this is an extremely important program. And, but this is not a lot different than our discussions about what we're going to do with contract police officers. The sheriff saying, that's your decision, county board, and the county board has said, no, that's your decision with the allocation that you get. I think this is going to turn out to be the same thing. I think in all practicality, you're going to be presented with a budget next year, even if the board funds this, or with a number that is quite considerably lower than what you have now, and the board's going to say, you have 2 choices here. You can decide, Sheriff, how you want to allocate this money to what programs are most important, and if you won't, then I guess the county board will have to decide. But, so that's something at least you don't have to answer now, but you need to be thinking about, and I know we've talked about it before, because in all likelihood, that's something you're going to be faced with. So that's why I told the board, even if you approve that we're going to do it, the issue is going to be back on the table come January 1st. And I'm not arguing against it, I'm just saying, you have to be clear on what your priorities are, and frankly, what I'm hearing now is, well, no, I guess I'm not. I guess the question will be, what are your priorities? If you don't get this much funding next year, you're going to have to make decisions yourself, or you're going to tell the county board, listen, we're not doing it. We're not going to participate. You decide, which I don't think is a responsible way to go, but I guess that's your choice, because that's what it's going to come down to. If the board says we're going to fund this, and we have to cut 5% out of your budget for 2011, you're going to have to cut 5% plus $115,000 if this is a priority for you.
Our decisions have been made. I thought I expressed that in the agenda item. Absent this funding, our service to the schools is done.
So what you're saying then, in effect, is Marine Patrol, snowmobile, everything else you do is more important than this program, which in my mind, I don't mean to disagree with you, but it kind of contradicts the argument you've made to everybody of how important this is to the future of this county. That's my personal opinion.
Restate the motion.
Would you please restate the motion, and then we'll have a vote.
Commissioner Inman made a motion to approve the, hope I got the dollar amount right, $20,987. For the $28,000.
$20,987.
Okay.
For the remaining part of 2010.
For the remainder of this year and next
Yeah.
year, and to do an overtime analysis.
Okay, and I guess we will have a roll call vote, please.
Remainder of this year and next year, you're talking about school years?
I just said for the remaining part of this year.
Okay.
Which would be 2010.
2010, yeah.
All right. Roll call, please.
Okay. Commissioner Richardson,
No.
Inman,
Yes.
Cooper,
Yes.
Friend,
No?
Lees,
No.
Thomas,
Yes.
Stepka,
Yes.
4 yes and 3.
Oh.
You forgot Commissioner Maxwell.
Power.
No.
She forgot to
Thank you.
Next, our Health Department. Fred.
What was it, 4 to 4? Good morning, Fred
Morning.
Kiesler, Health Officer, Grand Traverse County Health Department. The issue has come up before of having prescription reduction cards, and we've been in contact with the National Association of Counties regarding their program, and I've talked with other health officers in the state that like the program. I've got a card here that I'll, if you don't mind, I'll hand out. Gives you an idea of how the program works, is that if we reviewed the contract with the prosecutor's office and they approved it, is if you approve that contract, then we would then negotiate with these folks or work with them as to how many of these cards we get, because I don't really have an idea. We would have to do a little bit of groundwork with the pharmacies to be sure they're aware that this program would be coming. And then we would get a batch of these cards where people can immediately use the top of it to get about a 22% reduction on their prescription needs. That's regardless of your economic standing, and it's regardless whether you have insurance or not. Of course, if you have insurance that covers the prescription, that'll be first. But if you have a drug that's not covered by insurance, or you don't have insurance, then you may get a reduction with this card. And then the applicant then can call the 800 number and they'll get a permanent card, and it has the county logo on it. And that's about all there is to it. It just gives people that. It seems like a nice program for people, especially in these hard times, to help get a reduction. One thing it has also is if you have a prescription for your pets, is it covers some veterinary prescriptions also.
I think that's cool.
Commissioner Inman.
You know, this is one of the programs, you know, as you know, I'm pretty close and affiliated with National Association of Counties through the years at the county board, and this is something that they have aggressively come out with, and we do have a number of counties in the state of Michigan that have taken this on. All of them come back with just very positive reports. This is a great public relations tool for the county commissions to offer this to the residents at no cost, either to the county or to them. And they, as a part of the tracking mechanism, the counties get a report back, not with names, but with total dollars saved per month for their county residents. For example, Tuscola County has been averaging over the last 12 months anywhere from $25,000 to $28,000 in total savings a month in prescription coverage to their residents. So it's one of the more aggressive discount cards that are out there. I know there's quite a few of them, but it has been very well accepted in other communities, and I think it's something that at least we could step back and say to our residents, you know, we cared enough to research this thing and extend it out to you, because we know, especially in these economic times, that, you know, every dollar you can save on prescription coverage is, you know, a dollar you can bring back to your family. So, you know, with that, I would make a motion that we move forward with the agreement as presented.
Discussion.
Quick question.
Discussion. Go ahead, Commissioner Friend.
Does any cost associated just in getting this out,
Well,
minimal through your budget?
you know, Janine Taylor, our community outreach person, will have to do some outreach to the pharmacies to be sure. And it looked like Walgreens, Walmart, Sam's Club, Rite Aid, Thompson Pharmacy are on board. But each of the pharmacists, there's a little bit of orientation as to how,
how the program works a little bit that we'll have to put in. And then we would distribute the cards at the health department, at probably our adult services and our adolescent health clinic and our maternal child health program and probably at environmental health. And at the department heads meeting, I mentioned it, and some other departments, it's just Department on Aging, who are interested in being able to give those out too. So there'll be a distribution of these applications that Commissioner Richardson has that would go out to the departments, and there may be some more rules about the distribution of that. I haven't, because I just had a preliminary talk with these folks at NICO, and they said, well, get your contract approved and then we'll talk more. So.
Okay, don't forget to distribute to your veterinarians.
Yes?
Commissioner Richardson.
Do we know what pharmacies participate or will participate?
Well, I just said that we checked in Walmart, Walgreens, Sam's Club,
Thompson.
Pharmacy,
Probably
Rite Aid.
Rite Aid.
Okay, because Caremark's a division of CVS, but we don't have any CVS pharmacies up here, right?
Kmart was another one.
Kmart was another one?
Yeah.
Okay. And when they talk about 22% off, I mean, is that just, they just take whatever their price is and?
That's the average. That's the average, and I'm sure some drugs it probably doesn't cover it all, and some may be better than that. But that was the average according to a study done 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's sort of the person, like the county resident who gets one of these cards probably should still call around and find out, check pricing.
We'll do a survey before we give out any cards so that we have it clear as to which pharmacies will take those.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest fear is that we would say, oh, here's this great discount card, and then it turns out that people really aren't getting discounts.
Exactly.
But because people don't take necessarily the time to check, they might not know, so.
Exactly. I mean, the backfire if we offer this great thing and then it didn't work. So there's some legwork that we have to do ahead of time to make sure that it's going to work then.
Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. Immunizations, Fred.
Yeah, immunization station. As you're aware, we did our large H1N1 immunization clinics last fall at the mall and kind of built a relationship with the Traverse City Mall, and they offered us that place at a reasonable price, I guess, for setting up immunization station when we got an additional $100,000 for the H1N1, and we leased that up through June 14th. And we're about to disassemble that and phase it out in the next week or so. And the mall manager talked to me, and he said, well, any chance we'd ever use it in the future? And I said, well, this fall, when we get our seasonal flu in, and of course, seasonal flu this fall will have H1N1 in it, we'll be up again. And also, we usually have what we call a kindergarten roundup, where we try to get kids that are going to be entering school this fall, that in August we try to get all the regular immunizations caught up. So he said that they might be able to give us a reduced amount up through Thanksgiving for about $4,200 for that to continue to leave it open, and we don't have to tear it down. And that's very tempting, because that would make it easier than us going to all the senior care centers and to other places where we've done these outreach for flu and the childhood roundups. So I'm proposing, if you're agreeable, that we continue this, if we can negotiate this out with the mall to continue to keep it open through November.
Commissioner Friend?
I would suggest anybody who's looking at doing immunizations. I took my child for a well checkup, got an immunization, thought they're covered. Luckily, we have good insurance. And one of them was not covered, and I should have checked it out because I paid $170-some for it. And I should have taken them to the health department to the immunization.
Well, we did, just an example, we had some, at the immunization station, we had economic recovery money, and we immunized over 100 people for the shingle shot. This was $200, and we were able to give it for $5. So
we did about 100 people there, so if you do the math, we saved them quite a bundle of money by doing that.
I think Fred had indicated to me in our meeting yesterday that he's been real pleased with the participation at this immunization station, and that it's kind of developed its own, kind of niche, and people are attending it. And so, he sees the benefit of continuing it, and I agree with that. He signed the contract on this because of the H1N1, but he didn't want to move forward with this. We are in agreement without consensus that the board was okay with continuing it.
So are you looking for a motion then?
I don't think a motion is necessary unless the board, feels that that's better. I think it's okay as long as there's no problem with the board. We'll just amend the contract that exists and extend it out through November.
So consensus works.
Yeah, consensus, I think, works.
You know what, why don't you go ahead and make a motion, just to make it clear?
Okay.
So we don't
Okay,
have any...
I would move that we authorize Fred Kiesler to extend the contract at the immunization station through November.
Support.
We have a motion and support. Discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries.
Thank you. And
Thank
I
you,
will
Fred.
tell you, you say, how are we going to pay for that? Well, we did do, thanks to Jerry, we did bill for a lot of the H1N1 from private insurance and took in over $60,000 that wasn't budgeted through the H1N1 project. So we can borrow, take from that fund.
Great.
Fred, nice job on your annual report.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Good job, yeah.
I got it. There's a lot of useful information in there, Fred.
We use that thing all the time. We printed up 75. I sent one to each of the villages, the city, and the townships, and actually people read it. But I use it like when we get a new employee, or if we get a student, or if we get just the media, and they're asking background, is we just give them the report or give them the pages that fit that program. And sometimes I'll read in the Record Eagle or hear on the news them paraphrasing right from that report. So it's really great. It's a good tool. It's not, a lot of counties just have little bifolds, reports. And it doesn't go into as much depth of the programs, and I think every year we try to improve it a little more. Can I ask a question, though? Is that part of our accreditation, we have to show that we presented this to the board? I mean, that's a required thing. Will this be in the minutes, then, that it was presented or given to the board, then?
Yep, and it'll be in the minutes as approved as a consent item.
Okay.
So I think you'll have everything you need to verify.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, anything
Next on the agenda, car allowance for the prosecuting attorney.
Well, this, I thought the prosecutor would be here today. He's making the same request, basically, that the Register of Deeds made. I believe he's the only elected official now not receiving the car allowance, and I think the arguments are the same. The only other thing I would add is he actually was approved for a car allowance several years ago, and at that time declined it, but now that all of them have it, he's asking for it as well. My suggestion to you would be, if you decide to do this, that you do it and tell him it only happens if he can find the funding in his budget.
In his budget?
Yeah.
As we did the Register of Deeds.
Yeah.
All right. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the request for the car allowance within the budget of the prosecutor's office.
Is there support?
Support.
For what amount, Larry?
What is the amount that
I would suggest you set it at the same as the county clerks. I can't remember what that number is.
Yeah, same as the county clerks, whatever that was.
All right.
Linda, do you know that number? $450 a month.
$450 a month.
Okay. Discussion. Commissioner Friend.
When I saw this was in here, I thought, good going, Al Schneider. I don't blame him a bit. I would have done exactly the same thing if I were in his shoes. Having said that, I'm not going to vote for it because I haven't felt that we should approve any additional car allowances, and I still think that we need to tackle that problem.
Hopefully in 2011.
Yes, I would agree. Well, we can't.
Oh, that's election thing.
officials.
Yeah, elected officials.
We
yeah.
can't.
For the
But as
term
soon
of
as
the
we
office.
can, I agree that we do need
Yeah.
to tackle this problem. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, aye? I'm sorry. Yep. All those opposed, no?
No.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Inman,
Yes.
Hooper,
Yes.
Friend,
No.
Lees,
Yes.
Thomas,
No.
Stepka,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Chairman Max Bauer,
Yes. All right, next on the agenda, the ad hoc committee findings and final report on Siegel wage and benefits study, and it's nice to see you all again, and would you please introduce yourselves for the television?
Good morning. My name is Kathy Jones, and I was a member of the committee, and I'll let these ladies introduce themselves.
I'm Liz Sayre King.
My name is Kay Sarah.
And Paula Segala.
All right.
And if you'll direct your attention to the monitors, we've prepared just a brief report. You have the full outline, but we're going to take this from a high level for just a moment. See, as you know, there was a committee that was put together to look at the issue of the Siegel wage and benefit study that was conducted in '06 and '07. The county was very fortunate to have the committee members that have volunteered for this committee. I have to take a moment to say that collectively, each person listed as a committee member on the screen brought a strength that was very different from everyone else's. Together, synergistically, we were able to look at this study from a 360-degree angle. So we feel we've given it a very thorough scrubbing. We were asked to take a look at 7 different objectives. So we're going to walk through these objectives from a very high level, telling you our conclusions. You do have the full report, and at the end, if there are any questions of the committee, then we will entertain those. So our first objective was to verify the credentials of Siegel and validate the RFP scope and criteria. We do feel like Siegel's credentials are valid. We base this on a couple of things. Number one, their prior experience, which we took a look at, their reference checks, which we did talk with the county administrator about, and a follow-up phone call that this committee had with a member of the Siegel committee that actually did the study. We were able to gauge that the depth of knowledge they have was valid for this particular study. The scope of, the criteria for, and the response to the RFP were valid. We based that on an analysis, a very thorough analysis of the RFP, Siegel's response to that RFP, their scope of work documentation, and then further conversations. So we were fine with Siegel as the individuals to conduct the study. However, when we got into Objective 2, determine if the data collection process used was valid and if techniques used to develop were appropriate, our conclusion was the techniques used to develop nor the data collection process were valid. We believe this because the selection of one set of comparables that included all employees, coupled with the introduction of an ERI, which was not in the scope of work originally stated, nor the RFP, we felt changed the scope and the focus of the study, and therefore it changed the results of the study. If the study had not used that ERI, then inherently those would not have been the comparables chosen.
Commissioner Richardson.
Could I
Yes.
just interject here? Because obviously I read through your report, which seemed very thorough. Could you just explain the acronym ERI? Because I didn't know what it was, and it kept being referred to.
ERI stands for Economic Research Institute. It is basically, it's an organization that compiles a massive amount of data from both public and private employers and analyzes it on a geographic basis. And for right now, let's leave it at that, but it's going to come along later.
So basically, it's the fudge factor that they use to determine how this county compares with other counties?
There is an adjustment factor.
Yes.
ERI, they calculate both a cost of labor factor by location and a cost of living factor by location, based on, as I say, a very massive database that they have at their disposal.
Thank you.
Anything else, lady?
Okay.
Because we feel like the ERI factor led to comparables and the use of an adjustment factor, we don't think there was enough emphasis placed on where your employees are being recruited from. We think had you looked at that, there would have been more diversity in your market comparables. And as Kay said, when this study was done, the ERI has 2 factors, cost of labor, cost of living. Only one of those factors was used, cost of labor. That understated what we believed were the Traverse City comparables automatically. So in our opinion, the study was not valid. That said, however, we do believe the benchmark job titles and surveys were sufficient for the study. In your report, you will see the discussion that we had concerning the other surveys, the wage, the benefits, and the internal employee opinion surveys, and our problems that we had with those are outlined for you, so I won't take the time to go through those. In terms of the questionnaire that was posed, the questionnaire was very well done. It was very thorough, very, very thorough. We felt it could have been a little more succinct and still accomplished its goals. We also discussed the fact that given the way this questionnaire was completed by oneself, it's very difficult to do self-evaluation of one's own job and divorce self from it. However, that said, we don't feel like the length or the fact that the individual performed the analysis of the questionnaire would necessarily render those to be invalid. Our fourth objective was interaction with the staff and its appropriateness. We don't feel qualified to answer that objective. We were not given any indication of the level of interaction between Siegel and the staff, and so we don't feel we can pass judgment on any appropriateness of that interaction since we do not know what that interaction was. We also did not see the results of an employee survey. In terms of validating what was filled out by the employees, again, we don't know what that was. We do not feel qualified to express an opinion. We did not see the employee responses, and so we cannot assess the sufficiency of that interaction with supervisors. Our sixth objective was to determine if the process used to point factor jobs into classifications was appropriate. The truth is, we didn't see any evidence that indicated Siegel used a point factor system. In fact, to the contrary, we saw more of a market-based approach to assigning grades to classifications, and we did not see anywhere where there was any analysis done for internal equity. And so based on that, we do feel the proposed Siegel job level assignments, nor this unified pay scale that they created, can be considered valid. Our seventh objective was the ERI, and I think we've discussed that. So, after reviewing this study in depth and discussing it at length, due to the concerns with the RFP and the response to the RFP, we thought you had a valid process going into this. We think it got derailed somewhere. The derail came when everyone was considered to be one group of employees, and the use of this ERI factor for one set of comparables came into play. We think it got derailed from that point. The use of the ERI, the comparables chosen, and the grade levels assigned to this unified pay scale, we believe any base pay increases that result from this study would not be valid. Now, that said, we do believe that you could theoretically use the 2006-2000 data, but the complexity of the exercise involved in bringing all of that data up to date makes it very impractical to do so. So we believe, it is our opinion, it would be preferable to revalidate your job and grade levels and begin anew. In talking with Siegel and in talking with our committee, we believe a suggested grouping for different classifications would be to look at your managers and executives and have Midwest comparables. Take your public safety positions and compare them with other state of Michigan individuals. Court positions with regional Michigan comparables, and all others with a local Traverse City area comparable. By bucketing into those four groups, you have cut down on the number that you have. You've cut it to 4, but you've got 4 that everyone will fit into with comparables that fit where those employees come from. The job descriptions as written should be reviewed again and brought up to date. We felt like the job descriptions had a very valid point and are a good starting point for the county. You may want to consider retaining your current point factor comparison system. because all your current job descriptions could then be reevaluated and sized into those updated point factor comparison systems. And what this would do is cut down on all these people coming back to you and asking for reclassifications of their positions, because you now have a current job description, an up-to-date point factor system, you have a means of fitting people into that system, and you then have a way of reviewing the internal equity across those classifications. The benefits data, we do believe, is tied hand in hand, although we did not see a total compensation report to you, as was previously charged with the study. We do believe that they are married and they do have to be considered, and if you start the salary study over, we would begin anew with the benefits data also. We think that your job title structures that were created by Siegel are a very good starting point. And without some type of quantifiable point factor system, this committee does not see any way to determine internal equity with the unified pay scale that was created. We do not see how you would place new employees in it, nor how you would even reclassify existing employees into that market-approached basis. And with that, we thank you very much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have said publicly on more than one occasion that we need to drive a stake through that book and the study. And while I don't think that that's probably 100% accurate, I think it's darn close. Do we have any questions or comments? Commissioner Inman.
Just a couple observations that maybe you can help me with. And if you don't have an answer, that's fine, because, you know, you completed your role, and I thank you for your extra time and effort and providing us the report and the evaluation. With regard to the issue of the ERI, I guess that's what it is, in terms of not having it as part of the request for proposals, there was, as you know, they came in and did a presentation to the Board of Commissioners, and they had recommended, in terms of an approach, would include an ERI that was heavily discussed with the Board of Commissioners, the administrative staff, and his leadership team managers, and they felt that that would be an agreed approach that we had a comfort level with. So the fact that it wasn't in the request for proposals, I think subsequently, I think that, you know, the board had latitude to discuss, you know, going to larger counties and then applying this discount factor. So I personally, I don't know if that is the total strength of the invalidation because it wasn't in the request for proposals.
No.
Okay.
No.
And the second, I think the second question I have for you is that on your recommendations, in terms of going out to managers and executives and some other spots, you had going out to the Midwest and those kinds of things. How, I mean, if you go out to other counties or other areas within the Midwest, wouldn't you have to go back to an ERI approach to make it equal to the Grand Traverse County? Wouldn't you have to go back to the same Siegel analysis if you use something other than local comparable counties? And that would lead you right back to an invalidation again?
Sure, and
Okay,
help me
all
on.
right.
Okay, what the issue with the ERI was, as we said, there's two calculations that they do, the cost of living and the cost of labor. What was done in this study, what Siegel at some point came forward with apparently and recommended using the ERI, cost of labor. And what that does, basically, it calculates, it's a factor by city that says, all right, that city, because they did it city, even they called it county. So that city's cost of labor is higher. So therefore, what they did is they used the ERI factor and they discounted, they knocked it back. So therefore, let's say, for instance, that Grand Rapids, just choose one, or Ann Arbor, had a job that paid $50,000. If their cost of labor was 10% more than Grand Traverse County, they knocked it back 10%. They called it 45. Okay? So that was the, quote, apples to apples. What it did, essentially, it was kind of like a currency exchange. It put everything in Traverse City dollars. All right? But in reality, you don't, that's not reality. Fact is, that job in Ann Arbor pays $50,000. And if you've got an employee here in Traverse City that's looking, then that job will pay the $50,000, and there you go. So it was our feeling that you need to look at the reality of what does exist in the market. So under that thinking, if you go to the Midwest and you're looking at whatever, Des Moines, Iowa, then you want to know what Des Moines, Iowa pays. Does it pay $50,000, $60,000, $40,000, what, compared to Grand Traverse County? So no, sir, we would not believe that ERI is, we believe it was not appropriate here, and I don't believe that we would feel that it would be appropriate anywhere else either.
We think the raw data itself, compared to other comparables, would lead you to a better conclusion than using only one component of an ERI factor. Because while the cost of labor here may be less, the cost of living is not. The cost of living is higher in Grand Traverse County than some of the other counties. And so we feel like had you used the raw data and not applied the ERI, and you took your comparables for your court systems from your various areas, and then you did your high and your low range, and where would we place them based on what factors, you would have served yourselves much better than if you had just applied a discount, put everybody in the same bucket, looked at one place for all of these jobs, and then discounted everyone back to Grand Traverse County on a cost of labor basis.
Final question?
Certainly.
So I guess what I'm reading, I believe, is that you would have preferred, or you didn't like, but you would prefer a different approach other than what this national firm had recommended. You would have, if we would have brought you in during the beginning of the process and asked you, how should we approach this thing, you probably would have said, go towards more in the same population market that, from a low to a high that you would, that, a county would normally use, and use those as your comparables, rather than going to a much larger county and doing a discount factor.
Correct.
Basically is where your conclusion is coming from.
And we thought that the reason Siegel used this approach was because their direction from the county was to try to simplify and group everyone together and come up with comparables for all jobs that would work for all jobs. And their response to that was saying, well, we can do that, but then when we do that, we have to use this ERI factor.
That's very possible, because we were trying to consolidate
Right.
the various things with the 13 unions and everything. We were trying to
Right.
make it simpler, so that could very well be the reason.
Yeah.
And that's what we were saying when we said we thought it got derailed. We thought the RFP, the way it was written, and the response to the RFP was very well done.
And meshed.
Yes, and meshed together. But I think we got derailed when we started trying to simplify, create one set of comparables, which then introduced this ERI factor and a discounting factor, and then we only used the one factor instead of the two in tandem. And so we do believe that's where it got derailed.
It would have been better if they would have said, you can do it, but we don't suggest
recommend it.
We don't recommend it.
Yep.
Okay.
Agreed.
Could I ask a question?
Certainly does.
When we had our discussion, we talked about what kind of factors would be good to use in terms of determining comparables, and we always said population was one. And remember, we told you that in our past study, we used taxable value as a second comparable. Did you have any thoughts about that, or were there other things that you thought we should look at?
Population is one. Okay. When you define a labor market, you look at where do you lose people to, where do you hire people from, and who do you compete with in terms basically to keep the people you have. So that's your labor market. Generally, what that translates out to is that your comparables will be like employers, okay, county in this case, and typically you would have some bigger, some smaller, and then some about the same. And when we spoke with a Siegel representative by teleconference, she did say that it was very unusual to see a market survey that had only larger comparables, because again, if you look at the full matrix of the labor market, you'd have a broader range. So you look at the size of the employer, how like you are they, or how similar you are in terms of what you're all about. And I don't think we really got into taxable value at the time period, no.
Any additional questions? Commissioner Richardson.
I don't know how significant this was in the whole process, but I had a question about the internal employee survey. Because you make a comment that In order to receive a meaningful sample and a questionnaire, they need 217 responses. How many responses were there?
We don't know.
We never were.
We weren't informed.
But it was just given to the non-contract employees.
Well,
I think it was given to all employees.
It was,
Yeah.
let me explain that. It was given to all employees. It was put out on the web, and we asked all employees to respond. We immediately received letters from the unions saying, this is bargaining with our employees, and you're not allowed to bargain with our employees. They're not allowed to comment.
Individually as opposed with the union. Okay.
So what happened was, they told everybody, do not fill out the survey. So the only ones who filled out the survey were non-union employees. And that's where we just cut it off, because when we looked at it with our attorneys, we said, they may be right. This could be considered bargaining. We don't want an unfair labor practice, so we told them of course, they didn't have to do it.
Okay. So do you know how many responses we've gotten?
I don't know. Carol, do you? Probably 50 or 60 responses is all we got, because then we cut it off,
Yeah.
for that reason.
Commissioner Friend?
When they were looking to find counties for comparables, and I remember reading through some of the information, by the way, this was the nicest committee that as a commissioner I think we've ever gotten kicked off of. That was
Yes, without question.
Anyway,
And the most professional.
then, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I think it was a good idea. But anyway, when you were looking for comparables, I remember reading that the way they came up with the counties that were used, which when I looked at some of the demographics of it, I mean, I didn't know if they were comparable or not. I remember being asked that, when I first started at the commission, do you think that they're valid? Heck, I don't know. And I remember looking at the data going, geez, I don't know if they are or not. But that list, did it not come from the staff, the department head saying, here's where we're losing people to, or here's where we're gaining them from?
That's exactly what it was. We sat in this room on a conference call with Siegel, and at that point, I think our staff had been convinced that because of this ERI factor that they told us would equalize, that it really didn't matter on which counties were chosen. So we said, so the question was asked, where are you losing people to? And we had elected officials in here, we had judges in here. And I'll recall we had some preliminary ones identified that were probably the ones that were more close to us. And this was my mistake, clearly. And so they said, well, where are you losing people to? And I remember the judges sitting there and saying, well, we're getting people recruited we're losing people to Ann Arbors and to Grand Rapids and this and that. And of course, immediately with me, with my background, it sends up the red flag. Well, you're looking for counties that are bigger, that are going to enhance your ability to get wage increases for your employees because you're going to be comparing different sizes. But frankly, I had been convinced that this ERI was going to equalize all of that, based on what we were told by the consultants and, and staff that worked in that area. So I was like, it really doesn't matter which ones you pick. And that's what I told the group. I said, pick who you feel you're losing people to. and Siegel on the phone said, yeah, that's fine. It doesn't matter. So I knew they were all bigger. It's the first time I've ever done a study like this where we picked all bigger, but I didn't think it mattered because of this ERI, not understanding it as completely as what these folks do. So that's why we did it.
Okay, so then picking up on what Kay mentioned, you would take a look at where you're losing them to and where you're gaining them from, but then you'd also take a look at some of the demographic or the population and the assessed value to see if they are comparable, and you might kind of either take out of that group or add to it
Well,
some more
the simplicity of it is when they explained to me and when they said, for example, clerical staff, you aren't losing them to Ann Arbor, you aren't losing them to Grand Rapids. That made perfect sense to me. We're losing those locally here, to Munson, to the schools, whoever, private sector, whoever. That made total sense. The reason that we got lost in all of that was our goal of trying to consolidate it into one, because this makes total sense, and I think we've learned that this is the way we need to go, and I totally agree with their recommendation in this regard. This is going to make negotiations much more difficult, because several of the unions have members in several of those classifications. So what's going to happen is, I'm going to get one salary survey, and I think they would agree, one market survey for some of the unit that might show that they're 5% behind. And another part of that same unit might show that they're 3% ahead.
Right.
Now I've got to negotiate some kind of a salary, and how do I do that when half of their group is paid too much and half of their group is not paid enough? That's I think you would agree, that's what we're going to run into from a negotiation standpoint. That was the reason that we said if we can consolidate into one and simplify it, then what our result comes back and says 3% behind, we can go to everybody and say 3% behind, yep, yours isn't perfect. It might not be quite, but overall, we're 3% behind. That was kind of the theory, but, it's clear that that's difficult. I think it was Kay who said, that's not where you're losing your clerical people,
And Paula, I remember when we were talking in one meeting, and it was about the comparables, and you had mentioned, given your background with the public sector, you had said, it's not the way that it should be done to compare everybody, all employees to, specific comparables. It should be broken out by these different types of employees. But you had mentioned typically public organizations don't do that. This would be more like your private sector approach.
Yes, truly. I'm not saying that public sector should not look at private sector models, okay, to become more sophisticated in their approach. But because of the bargaining units and the philosophy of the bargaining or the negotiating mentality within the unions, all right, they would look at this and say, we don't want to go there. Well, but the reality and the truth is,
we should go there.
We should go there. It does not make it easy for the employer to negotiate, but it is the reality, and the raw data should support the reality.
I guess, though, that it's fair to say that if we were able to develop the base under this system and get everybody where they should be, that when we go back and look at the various markets, you wouldn't expect that there'd be great disparity in what the markets are giving as annual increases, perhaps. I mean, it's not likely that they're going to be huge. They might be huge at the beginning when you set everybody where they belong, but generally speaking, especially in this economy, everybody's probably going to kind of stay the same as we go on. So maybe it won't be as difficult for negotiating as what it could be. So
another factor that we believe that really needs to be looked at is if you want a total compensation picture, then you need to factor in what are the benefits. And if the benefits to county employees or these groups are higher, okay, than comparables, then there needs to be a factor, an adjustment made within your total comp program on that. If they're lower, it has to be made.
And that's also a very private sector approach.
Yeah.
And I would think really difficult to quantify.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yes, exactly. The other that we totally missed, and maybe one exists, but we didn't see that there was a county philosophy, compensation or benefit philosophy. Philosophy would entail, we want to be the highest paid employer in our state or our region or our whatever. But to define it so that you knew when you're looking then at all the raw data, how that comes together, and if it matches the philosophy that the county has directed staff to live by.
Well, the philosophy used to be in the top 25% of our market. That was initially it. And then when we changed the market to taxable value and population combination, we wanted to be at the middle. That's kind of what the goal was. And so the assumption here was, actually the board talked about it, we would be at the middle of this new market is where we wanted to be. That was kind of the goal. But of course, as you explained very well, it all got moved once we made the decision, try to put it together, and I didn't understand that until, but it's very clear, you're right. You're right.
So can you just synopsis for me, what is useful, still salvageable out of the Siegel study?
wants to tackle that?
Start. From what we could tell, it appeared that the job descriptions that apparently they wrote after everybody filled out the JAQ, they did the interviews, it sounded like it was very intense work. But as we understand it, the result of that is that you do have good solid 2- or 3-page job descriptions on every county position. That is essentially up to date, 3 years, that's pretty good. So if you start with your job descriptions, that's good. Number 2, I think it's in the final report that Siegel did quite some work looking at your title structure. And that they came up with a title structure hierarchy by department or group. And that looked good too. So if you have both of those, it seems that I think all of us are agreed that you're in a really good position to start with that as a groundwork and go forward. Because the point factor system that was in the summation, as we said, we couldn't tell that Siegel used a point factor comparison system. It appeared that they did some kind of job clustering. They didn't really use anything quantifiable. And if you have a point factor system already, which you've had since, what, 1990s?
Yeah, early 90s, I
Well,
think.
just because it's been here since 1990 doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
So you have your 10 factors. You have safety and computer and supervision and all of those different criteria. If you took those criteria, looked at them fresh and said, okay, are those still the criteria that are important to county jobs, and put the relative value on those criteria, then you take your criteria that you've refreshed, you compare that against your existing job descriptions and your title structure, and basically you resize, reevaluate, recalibrate all of your existing county jobs, which I think Siegel says in here that really anybody should go in and basically recalibrate their job structure every 5 years or so. And it's easy to say and hard to do, but you've got all of the ground material.
So then we calibrate them, we put them in the various or in the various groups.
You've got A through whatever.
Right, and then develop markets,
Right.
except for this benefit idea.
And actually, what I think Kay was getting to was a process for determining internal equity.
Right, right.
But you could still take that as a starting point to
Go out and...
go outside.
And then develop 4 separate markets.
Right.
And then survey, and then apply that to these 4 separate groups, categories. What do we call them? 4 separate...
Classifications.
All right.
Yeah.
And then...
Markets.
Okay. So those pieces still have to be
So
reviewed.
basically, what we're saying is the takeaway from the study are your job descriptions and the hierarchy of those job descriptions. You have the bones already in your point factor system
Okay.
to update that. Take what's valid from the study, mesh it with your updated point factor, get your comparables, put people in those, and move forward.
Commissioner Inman.
Well, I want to go back to not making the second mistake. That is, you've given us great direction in terms of how we should approach what's available, at least in the report, and move forward. But to be honest with you, if we're relying on your expertise and opinion on this thing, I wouldn't want us to come back later, have a discussion, and throw some stuff out and say, well, that's going to be the market now we're going to review, and then have somebody later come back and say, I didn't like that market, and then we're going to come back to you and say, could you gals come back again and tell us, is that the market you would have used? So, I'm going to do a lot of sucking up here. Is that, is there, I'm just going to throw this out, could you at least help us one last time if we did put together what we think are the markets for these comps? Could you say yes or no to that?
We did ask ourselves that question.
Okay.
If you approached us with that, what would our answer be? And our answer was, we would leave the room, we would talk about it, and we'd come back to you.
That's fair. I don't want to get a situation where, the board thinks that we're going to move in a supplemental direction. We're going to review another market. We're going to have staff go out and start calling or sending stuff in and asking for new data so we can approach this from a different aspect, and then come back and say, we didn't like the way you reviewed the comparables. I mean, let's have some kind of consensus on the comparables. I mean, it would be helpful, but.
And I think I would recommend taking a step back from that and not really dealing with that right now, but starting with the job descriptions, and, I mean, unless there are just markets that are sucking people away from Grand Traverse County, which I
Right.
don't think they are.
No.
That you would take a step back, start with those job descriptions, make sure that they're still accurate and complete, get input from the people who are in them, and that in itself is going to probably be a several-month task. And then work on your internal equity.
The point
and
factor.
Because the impression that we got was that the reclassification issue and people making requests, because that's the only way they can get increases outside of the annual COLA or whatever, would be the place to start, and to start with. And would you guys agree with that?
Those two steps need to be your starting point.
Yeah.
And then once you've got you've validated your job descriptions, updated your point factor system so that you know where these updated job descriptions would fit within your point factor system, then you step back and start on your
Market.
External
putting
and your
people
market.
and your external market.
Could I ask one more question?
Certainly.
It sounds to me that trying to do a complete classification comparison, which includes the cost of benefits, is a pretty expansive task. And I guess, just listening to you right now, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, we should try to tackle the salary piece of it and kind of hold that piece off, because I just know when people call us and say, all right, what's the cost of your health insurance? What's the cost of your retirement? Well, retirement, it depends on what category you're in. If you're under a defined contribution, defined benefit, it goes from 115% of salary down to 20. So I just think that's really hard for people to take the time to complete a survey on. That just seems to be. Do you have any advice on that? Do you think this study will not be as useful or valid if we don't do the benefit piece?
I can.
Please.
I don't. I think it would be fine to set that aside for a while, and I actually think that the way you'd want to start with that is with awareness and education, and you'd want to let employees know, here are the cost of your benefits this year. If they, I've worked with organizations that actually put it on the pay stub every 2 weeks or however often people are paid, that says, this is what the county's paying for your health insurance, this is what the county's paying for your vacation time, this is what, and start with that piece before you jump into, we're going to roll it all into one and tell you what you're really being paid, what your total comp is.
Yeah.
Do you have?
And
we agree.
To kind of go to what Paul was as well, as long as you're working on developing a total compensation philosophy.
Right.
Which is what
Yes.
Paula said, that because if you say you want to be competitive on your base pay, basically the middle, let's say, and then you find out that you're over competitive on your benefits, then, that's, so as long as you have a philosophy and you're working toward it,
Right.
would be the thing to do.
Working towards it, but I do agree with Liz, there has to be education to get those union employees to that understanding before you then make any further changes.
That's a good point, because
Everybody, yes.
right now, our education is more along the lines of, do you realize how much more it's costing this year than last year? That's kind of what we do when we talk with them.
Yeah.
And we're not, they don't understand in all
I think it needs to
cases
be a continual sort of
ongoing.
in your face sort of, this is what we're paying right now, and and in 2 weeks we'll tell you again, this is what we're paying.
And you can break that down 2 cents per hour.
Absolutely.
Take that and break that down to the lowest common denominator, and that's cents per hour.
Everybody will
And
understand.
then everyone understands that pretty easily.
But it is an educational process and an awareness process, and if people aren't thinking like that now, it's going to take some time to get them in that mindset.
Okay, well, another question. If, and I appreciate you taking all this time. If, I don't know how many of you have worked with unions, but knowing kind of the way unions operate during negotiations, I guess my question is, and Jennifer and I have not had discussions about this, but do you have an opinion on whether these steps, the point factoring, the development of the markets, the analysis of the markets, do you have an opinion on whether or not it's advisable to have that done internally, or if it's better to be done independently from the standpoint of how it's perceived as equitable and fair?
I can tell you from the college's point of view, we have committed to a total compensation study over the next year. It is preferable that it be done through means of outsourcing. That said, it's not that we don't have the data, it's not that we don't have the knowledge, it's not that we don't have the ability, it's the perception by the employees of whether we had a vetted interest in the outcome. And the only way to separate that, the fact that we don't have a vetted interest, is to divorce ourselves from that study, but guide that study. Not completely divorce, we're going to guide that study, but we're going to allow the conclusions to be those of an external environment. So we won't outsource the whole thing, but pieces of it we will.
Thank you.
Jamel had her hand up. Jamel, do you want to come forward? Do you have a question, or?
Yes.
Come over here, Jamel. It'll be easier. Ladies stay.
Jamel Anderson, 911 Director, Grand Traverse County. I first want to thank you for your time. This has been an ongoing long-term situation, and I really appreciate that you took the time to help us understand and evaluate the study. And my question is a layperson question about the ERI. If Siegel had applied both components, cost of living and cost of labor, would that have validated the use of that tool?
It's very difficult to say. There is an inverse relationship between the two, because our cost of labor is lower, but our cost of living is not. And when you get into that type of situation, it's very difficult to say whether it would or whether it would have not, would have worked. Honestly, the best is to use your raw data, use your market comparables, and then you can really be assured that your data is what you would like it to be, rather than just a discounted factor across the board.
Okay.
I would say one other thing about the ERI, the cost of labor. As we said, in this particular study, all the counties, everything non-Traverse City was higher cost of labor. And had there been a comparable in there, let's say a smaller county or a geographically different county that had a lower cost of labor factor, what this approach would have done is in fact to inflate the salaries in that county. So they have a lower cost of labor if they're paying $50,000, and they have a 10% cost of labor lower than us. It would have inflated it. Right. And you just think,
Does that make sense?
Does that make sense?
And
So.
And I think we all agreed too that it added a layer of complexity that would make it very difficult to explain to employees, so that they would have a comfortable understanding of it, that maybe it wasn't really necessary.
All right, thank you.
Collecting of raw data, regardless of larger counties, smaller counties, but a good mixture of both, okay? And then looking at your philosophy, we want to be 25 percentile or the middle, will allow you to see that. Will allow you to see the large counties' wages, where they fall, and are we still there yet? Now, are we fulfilling our philosophy to our employees about what our compensation system will be?
And this is a very private sector thinking, but it's also what you can afford. I mean, do we have the money that we can even do this?
Some organizations change their philosophy with their budgets. If the budget, if they know they're going to fall on hard times, then the next component is we have to then take a look at our compensation philosophy and adjust that so that we're announcing to our employees, this is what we're able to pay, and then change it back. without having compensation and budgetary considerations being made together, then it's just, can we afford a 2% across the board increase? There's no meat and potatoes behind the decisions being made.
Do we have any additional questions, Commissioner Friend?
I just want to thank you again, because I think that this commission, in the past year and a half and prior to that, has kind of said, do we implement it, don't we implement it? It was all based on financial ability. But we never really got to the crux of the question, which is, should it be implemented? Is it valid? And you guys have provided a tremendous resource to us and analysis, and I think that we're all thankful for that. Dennis, I know that you're kind of just getting this report, but do you have any thoughts on moving forward with this? I mean,
I would like a month or till next month to come back and talk with you when Jennifer's had a chance to review this, go through this. I'm sure that she may have some more questions for this committee, and we'd like the opportunity to put together kind of a plan for you of how we might approach this if you're open to that idea. But obviously, it makes no sense to do anything further to adopt it, but kind of have Jennifer go back and evaluate where we're at, and put together a game plan that you might consider for how we move forward.
That sounds great to me.
Because we still have this inequity, and we still have the 80 or 90 reclassification requests sitting there, waiting to be done. But it just makes sense that we come up with a plan for you to do this. But I think everything they've said is absolutely valid.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for your help.
And it was a pleasure meeting you and knowing you, although, Paul, I already knew you.
I learned a tremendous amount.
We'll be sending you all board applications and for you to consider volunteering further. Thanks so much.
Next on our agenda, Commissioner Inman?
Could the committee agree that at our board meeting this month, if we could prepare certificates of appreciation for their work and effort regarding the Siegel study evaluation, we can present it to them at the board meeting at the end of the month? That'd be fine.
I can't imagine anyone would disagree with that.
Okay, all right. Absolutely. So if we can have staff prepare those and let the 4 individuals know if they could possibly come back for our board meeting for a few minutes. We'd publicly like to thank them.
Great. Be glad to do that.
All right. We did remember to privately with our note cards too, just so you know.
Next on our agenda, new business. Is there any new business?
No.
All right. Seeing none, this is our second opportunity for public comment. There is no public comment. Commissioner committee reports. I have mine. And I'm sorry I was on vacation, or you would have heard about this much sooner. And you probably already know a great deal of this. The Parks and Rec Board did pass unanimously a park rule for the Civic Center, no tobacco use at the Civic Center. And Dennis, it's my understanding that that rule has to be adopted by the county board, and we have to have public hearings on that. My question is, what was it? Last year, I believe, the county board adopted rules for all the parks. For instance, you can't have a fire except in a designated fire spot. I don't recall that we had public hearings on those. And
I don't recall that either, Commissioner. I'd have to go back and check. I know we adopted general rules for all the parks.
And my question is, if Mr. Cooney believes that we need to have 2 public hearings on no smoking, do we need to have 2 public hearings on those other rules that were passed?
That's a good question. I'll have to get you an answer from Mr. Cooney. The other thing is I want him to reevaluate it in terms of the new guidelines that he put in on what's the responsibility of the park board and what has to come back to the county board.
I will tell the commissioners that the Parks Board was under the impression that these are the types of things that we could handle at that level, but Mr. Cooney's opinion apparently is different.
Well, that was my understanding too, so I will get an answer for you by next week.
All right.
At RMA.
The next thing I would like to let everybody know is the Parks Board is in the process of discussing development of a formal tree donation program. We had a staff a meeting where staff had input on our parks with Danny Brown's group. And Paul Johnson mentioned that we lose 5 to 7 trees in the Civic Center every year due to age and disease, et cetera. And he also said that other parks are losing trees. And he gave some examples. And I was thinking that what we really need to do, and I guess the reason this came to mind is a friend of mine some friends lost their 20-year-old grandson recently in a car accident. And I thought, you know, I would like to do something in their grandchild's memory, and I would like to plant a tree. But there really isn't any kind of formal program where people become aware that this is an option for them. So we're in the process of talking about how to develop a program where people can donate trees to the county. Throughout the county, we have many parks where someone might want to plant a tree. Pool fees for seniors have been changed. The Parks Board has made a motion, and it passed, that senior fees for pool usage be 80% of individual fees. The discount was much higher in the past. We've also implemented a 52-week annual membership versus what it was before, and I will tell you it fluctuated before. It was anywhere from 54 weeks on up. There was no set annual membership, but there is now. The Parks Board also voted to alter Field 1, the baseball field at the Civic Center. I was the only no vote on that, but it wasn't that I didn't think that it was a worthwhile endeavor. It's simply that there were no costs given to the Parks Board, and I have no clue as to what it will cost to renovate that field. And so, but it was voted on unanimously, and I believe we are moving forward on that. We are also moving forward on some policies for the department and the board. Baseball. There are 580 children involved in the baseball program this summer. That, of course, is down from the American Legion's numbers. Sponsorships are also down. That is in part a result of sponsors' loyalty to the American Legion and the veterans. And let's see, I also was asked to thank the county board for increasing the authority of the Parks Board, but of course now we don't know if we actually have an increase in authority. So I guess that's my report, and Commissioner Felice.
What was your comment on the seniors pay 80%, and you said that's much?
It's higher. It's an increase.
Well, you're giving them a 20% discount.
I know, but
And what'd they get prior?
You know, honestly, I didn't figure out I knew someone was going to ask that question, and I should have taken a look at it, but it was, my husband...
They got a greater discount or a lesser discount?
I can tell you. I paid, if I get my calculator out, I pay $189 annually for a membership. I am not a senior, according to their senior rules. My husband is a senior. He pays $114.
So they're getting less of a discount
It's
under
less
the
of a
new
discount.
program.
It's still a discount.
They
It's
raised
less
the
of a
rates for
discount.
seniors.
So what made the Parks Board decide to punish the seniors?
We're not punishing the seniors. We're in line with just about every other senior discount there is. If you can find one better than 20%, let me know. Myers is 15. Commissioner Inman?
Question, if I could, regarding the Parks Board, on the Lutra study. Just trying to work on memory here, is that they had a number of recommendations, and overall they felt that, you know, it was possible for pool operations to at least break even or make some money, and they had different components in terms of where we should tackle this thing. Are they still working on those recommendations? Because I think it would be important to know if we believe that the components of the report are still being reviewed and acted upon, that when we get into the budget discussions for the remaining part of this year and next year, that if there was a belief that implementation of the report would improve the financial position of the pool.
You know, we have a report every month at the Parks Board on implementation of the LUTRA, and it does state that the LUTRA report is in the process of being implemented. But I will tell you, I will argue that. In my opinion, it is not. And in my opinion, it is, it's due to a lack of understanding of what the report says. And if you would like me to go into that, I certainly can do that.
Well,
But I don't know if anyone would
now.
like me to do that this morning.
Well,
But-
I guess I just bring that up to the point where, we paid for this report, and the report said that you can implement certain things or do different
Well,
things.
I
so
will
we can
tell
turn
you
the financial
that
situation around.
that the number one priority in the report is to reduce labor. And the numbers are in there, tells you what you have to do to reduce labor. And if you take a look at the labor numbers, the temporary part-time labor numbers, they are about 50% over budget already. And the projections are not good. Dennis does have the projections. He got them from Dean, and I know he and I have had this discussion. He's going to be sharing that with the county board. But clearly, that's not being implemented. There are other items in there that are not being implemented.
Like?
Well, for instance, the membership fees.
Okay.
There has been a pushback from staff not to implement a change in membership fees, and it hasn't been done. So, although I will say that we did pass a resolution that we would come in line with all other senior discounts and make it 20%, which is still a very generous discount for seniors.
Well, there's a significant difference, in my opinion, between the senior discounts at Myers, where you're a customer, and a senior discount to a taxpayer who financially has supported that institution and the county for many, many years. We do have seniors out there on fixed incomes that are very substandard monetarily, comparatively speaking, to other people in our community. And I think we just need to be conscious of that. It could be, and it would be interesting to see if any seniors had to drop out because of that adjustment.
Well, I just, my own personal opinion, we paid for the report. I guess we had some confidence that, we would have the ability to implement those. In fact, we moved forward with one of the recommendations is to hire somebody that actually is an aquatics manager to help us manage the pool, the hours, the staffing. I mean, I don't know, I don't have the ins and outs on her authority and what she can't do, but it seems to me that at some point in time, Dennis, I guess, would look at, where we're at with the LUTRA report, and are there some additional things we can or can't do to improve that situation over there? So.
Well, let me say this, that we are looking at it. I've been working with Commissioner Max Bauer on it. The recent change that you made to give more authority to the Parks Board really, I think, puts this under their purview. And we met yesterday?
Yes.
We met yesterday, and I told her that I was very comfortable and, in fact, preferred that the issue of the pool operation be reviewed by the Parks Board, and that when they recommend their budget to the county, that they only do so once they've evaluated that and made a decision on the appropriateness of it. There is a disagreement clearly on how much of the study has been implemented, how much of the study is not. For example, we're down one full-time union employee, and we haven't replaced that person, and it's being supplemented. But I'm not going to argue with the Commissioner that, we don't have, we're not overstaffed in other areas. But I think the Parks Board is the one who's most appropriate to look at that issue. And so but we are looking at the finances, because we don't want to get at the end of the year and find that we're another $50,000 short. And that's why we've met with Jason. We're going to meet with him again. We've sent him back to do some more analysis. But it's clearly a year of transition, the way we do scheduling, those kinds of things. But I think it's really most appropriate for the Parks Board, who's more intimately involved in it,
to give their evaluation of the appropriateness of it and get input from Commissioner Max Bauer and the rest of the board, the Parks Board, and then make, that presentation to us. So I think it's going to be evaluated probably at the 6-7 month range when we start putting the budget together. And I'm hoping that the Parks Board will give us a recommendation on that pool operation when they come with their budget.
Well, I do want to say that the Lutra report's a year old, and it still is not. And again, this is an arguable point. It's still not being implemented. And I will tell you, when the report was done, swim lessons, the contribution margin was a positive 56%. Over the winter, it was a negative 48%. And you can argue whether or not the economy is to blame. I would argue that the scheduling is to blame. But again, it's a difference of opinion.
But the Commissioner has clearly, spent more time analyzing those things than I have. I have not done that. I've heard from Jason, and he's reported, I think, to the board that they're at 75% implementation of Lutra. I know Commissioner Max Bauer doesn't agree with that. I know one thing that Lutra said was the union situation and the full-time employees were an issue. Well, I think I talked to the fact that that's going to be, you don't agree?
No, I don't. If you take a look at the numbers, they're a little over on their full-time help. And, another factor is, and you mentioned this to me, Marilyn, the secretary for the Parks Department, 20% of her salary was in the past directed to the pool. They've backed that down to 10% of her salary. You take a look at the revenues. Revenues are, although they're reported to be up, they're not. A $15,000 revenue check, was credited to this year, which should have been credited to last year. Another factor in the revenue is the $7,500 that we received as a grant from the tribe for underprivileged children, disadvantaged children, for swim lessons. Without that $7,500 in that revenue number, it looks even more bleak. Clearly, the picture is not good, and I do believe that the Parks Board is going to have to look at leasing the facility out. What we're doing is not working. And the question for this board is, where are your priorities? Are your priorities a school liaison officer, or are they a swimming pool? And how many children are served with the school liaison officer versus the 40 or 50 children that are taking swim lessons? These are questions that we're going to have to answer. I'm not here to answer them today. Right. But we are going to have to make some tough decisions. Commissioner Friend?
First of all, I just have to make a point on our priorities with the liaison officer. I think they still are. We did not decrease our funding for the liaison
You're
officer.
Exactly
so
right.
I just had to make that point. But the other thing is, when I'm listening to this, I think that you're right. It's up to the Parks Board to see through the implementation of the study. Is that not what I heard, correct? But also, the commission, having paid for the study, I think would want to know the status of it. Is the Parks Board planning on putting together a report, the study compared to the implementation of it, and submitting that to the commission at any point in the future?
There is a matrix that I asked to have done and is in the Parks packet every month that shows how much of the report has been implemented. But I can tell you, and I can give you specific examples where it is not being implemented. Dennis?
And what I was going to say is, there's this clear disparity. I, quite frankly, maybe I'm just being lazy, I don't know. This could take a whole lot of my time to try to get to the bottom of whether Commissioner Max Bauer is right with how much is implemented, if Jason's right with how much is implemented. And frankly, that's why I'm suggesting that's time that I don't have. And I'd rather have the Parks Board, whose job it is to run those operations, bring their opinion of that to you. And I think that's what I was suggesting, and I think Commissioner Maxbauer's fine with that.
I certainly am.
And I've already pledged that that's an issue I'm going to look at when I prepare the budget for you, because it's a huge issue. And, you know, facing this $2.5 million in cuts next year, I mean, these things clearly have to be looked at. And
there are organizations, there are private individuals who truly could run the facility and would be willing to. And we could lease it out and still have a facility. But again, this needs to be discussed at the Parks Board level, and it certainly has not been yet.
Okay.
Anyone else?
I was just going to say, that's what I was trying to get across, is that they can do that analysis and bring that forward to us. Is that happening at any definitive point in time? Or continually?
I don't know how far you are, Commissioner, you'd have to answer that.
The only thing we've done has been monitoring the report that we get each month from the aquatics director. And I will tell you, at the last Parks Board meeting, I did argue it a little bit, because you know, again, it's just been my experience, you know, that I'll give you an example. I gave it to Dennis yesterday. The Sunday before the last Parks Board meeting, you know, one of the things that Lutra says is the front desk is to be monitored, and people are to be stopped when you come in. And we had 2 guards and a clerk on duty. They were in the office. There was no guard on deck. I was able to walk into the locker room, didn't have to sign in, wasn't noticed. They were chatting, wasn't noticed, walked into the locker room, put my suit on, went in, did a few laps, stretched out because I'd been sore from the day before. No guard. It's you know, that's just one example, and I can go right down a list and give you more. But I don't think we have time for that this morning.
As I said, I have asked Commissioner Maxbauer, as the chairman of the Parks Board, and I will talk to Jason about that today. We met yesterday afternoon. I'm going to ask him to take the budget that he wants to recommend through the Parks Board and have it be a Parks Board recommended budget, similar to what we do with DPW, when they send it in to me. Even if it means it's delayed a few weeks to get it in, I'd rather have a budget that's going to have the input of the Parks Board in the recommendation that comes to me, and that's what I'm hoping will be done.
All right. Next on the agenda, notices and announcements.
So this Thursday night, 6:30, the meeting with the library boards. The external libraries, or the satellites, I don't know what we call them, have been invited as well and are aware of the meeting.
Member libraries.
Thank you. Member libraries will be here, so that's 6:30 this Thursday.
Tomorrow
And then-
night.
Pardon?
Tomorrow night.
Wow.
Time flies when you're having fun.
And then remember, June 8th, we're going to do the 2% application committees, and I'm going to call you because you're going to have all those interviews, a lot of interviews, 17 interviews, I think. And then we've got criteria, and we're going to have to rank, and then we have to decide whether you want us to, compile it and bring back a recommendation, or whether you want it to go right to the board. So I'll call the 4 of you on that, but that's going to be a long morning for you.
4 of you.
Yes, you're not one.
You were the chair and didn't appoint yourself.
I thought you hadn't. So it's Commissioner Inman, Maxbauer, Friend, and
somebody.
Stepka.
I'm sorry.
That's all we had.
All right. I would entertain a motion. All right.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We're adjourned.